Today, Dr. Salin will be speaking with four industry professionals in regard to their individual experiences and any advice they have for those looking and securing jobs. Thank you for joining us.
Certainly COVID's been the biggest thing to change and shift our industry. So whether you look at producer profitability, whether you look at different market demand insights, shifts in consumer preferences and how things are moving, whether it's within food service, retail, all of those different industry aspects, it's really probably challenged us to think and do business in a much different way.
Yasser, in Indianapolis, you're closest to where I went to grad school at Purdue, so you're next, please. What's changed in the last year?
Well, I would say pretty much the same thing. The big thing that happened is the pandemic and the COVID. And the bigger challenge was how can we maintain from the supply chain standpoint, those flow of products that we need, because Corteva is a global company. I'm in the crop protection side, which is the chemical that we use for what we grow. And what happened is that some of those raw materials come from different countries. So we had plants all over the world. And once you shut off a country or like a plant, then it becomes very challenging to get the product you need to the market you need, or to where the distribution centers and things like that. So that was the first challenge. And I think that was global. And surprisingly, most of the companies were able to manage, because we always have, second or third option in case we fail, and everybody works so hard to make it happen. The second challenge is working from home, working remotely. At the beginning, it was challenging, and we have a lot of technical challenges. Also, onboarding process, if you have like new people to come into the company, like before, we have all those programs and planning to get them exposed to the company culture, and you can shadow another worker. But with the COVID, that was a challenge as well. And the same thing is we've been at home since March, I think the week of March 16th, and but I don't think we're gonna go back to the way to working how we were. And I think we have to work now on going forward. It will be like more like a hybrid system where we have on-site and at work. I don't believe we're gonna go back to work to normal how we were before.
Jacob, how about you? What's changed in your industry in the last year? Maybe that's not the right word, industry, when you're working in ag consulting. But Jacob, what's been your take on the changes in your industry for the last year?
Good deal. So honestly, for us, the remote work has not been a huge deal. It's a change driven by COVID, because we were already primarily a remote organization. So like 80+% of our employees work from home already, and we have a couple of central offices. Now everybody's from home, but being a consultant, we primarily go wherever the client is. So that's definitely changed a lot. There's a lot less face-to-face meetings, a lot less traveling places, and going and delivering things in person, and a lot of it's remote, which again, we were pretty prepared for, just in the nature of things, how they've been. The second thing is it's actually been one of the busiest years I've had, because we've seen clients, as things like travel get reduced, which are usually significant budget line items, have gotten freed up. They've been willing to pull the trigger on some projects. Okay, we're not sending people and spending $500,000 to fly some people somewhere, so let's really hire those consultants and have them help us solve this issue, or those types of things. So really, it's been the transition to remote work, and then everybody trying to figure out technology, figure out Zoom, and then as Yasser mentioned, helping onboard people in a remote environment. That's something that, with us being remote before this, was kind of difficult, because you don't want to bring in either somebody that's new to consulting or a new grad directly to a remote environment without having the ability to build rapport and teamwork and team building and those kind of things. So that's something that's also challenging as well, with the few offices we do have people working from home. So
yes.
Okay, so in your industry, you're one not really working directly in the agricultural and agribusiness industry. What's been the biggest change for your industry in the last year?
So I'm in now in automotive industry. Before I was in financial industry at American Express. In my current industry, I think remote work was not a part of culture. I think it depends on the company itself. Our company, for example, was very conservative when it comes to remote work. But after the COVID hit, the good thing about our team was, since we're all data scientists, we can work remotely. The transition was not difficult because once in a while we already used to work remotely. But for other teams, especially operations, it was a difficult, I would say, time to adjust, especially you always need to deliver. So it doesn't change, but you need to make it work. So some teams were affected more than others, but I think we were on the good side of that, where we didn't really see impact. Actually, our leaders started, during the meetings, hey, you guys need to, calm down, because they saw productivity go up, and people were online more because you don't have to commute, and sometimes you work in the pajamas, and you don't need to dress up. Keeping it real, right? Productivity went up, and I think overall, it's been a change. Some adjustment needed to be done. But I guess the short answer would be it depends on the team, type of work they do. And we were not impacted as much, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So now I want to ask a question of the audience. The four talking about this year, it's a unique year, but homebound work may not go away. After your experience with being in a homebound, quote unquote, university, what's your tips for being productive and performing and maintaining a pace when you're working from home?
I'll answer, Dr. Salin.
Great, Wilson.
I guess one of my tips is on the education side has definitely been, one, having a schedule, saying, okay, this is my set aside time to study, to work on projects, to get assignments done. And then two is having the space. I've got a house, I've got 2 kids, I got one more on the way in December. And so it's a really busy place. And so to be able to find a spot and a space to say, hey, this is my space, my office, I'm going to work here. And I kind of go in there and I close the door. It's right next to the laundry room, but we deal with that. So, there's always quirks to every little thing. But that's helped me anyway.
I would say another important point is organization. You have to be way more organized if you're working from home, because you have to have a balance between work and life. And as Zafar mentioned, it's easily you can get dragged into meetings and into, let me finish this, or after dinner we'll just go out, just one email, respond to one email, or just do this homework, and end up not having that balance. That's important to get your energy. The other thing is that keep in touch and keep connected with your community, with your fellow students, with your professors. Be very active if you have any forums, if any media for communication. Keep in touch with what's going on, so you won't fall back, because we have tendency to leave it to the last minute. And I think it works well sometimes when we're in the university campus setting, because when you see everybody's working on a homework, you go work on a homework. When you see everybody attending something, you do it. But by yourself, I think we need more organization and more planning.
And I would say you have to be more deliberate on your networking side. I think you kind of pointed to that. And that's really hard in a home-based setting. I think one of the advantages of coming, at least for me, coming to a master's program, what was gaining access to knowing people, meeting people, and in a home setting, that's a challenge. And so you really have to be deliberate in making that effort to do that too.
Well, I'll just say from my point, as Wilson said, it's good to have a space. And in my house, I have 3 different spaces. And in my office now, I have 2 different spaces. So that's important, especially if you forget to put up your fancy Zoom background, carefully planned office background. I think it would have been better too if we'd have had some dog interruptions during our classes. I don't have dogs and don't have them in the office either, so that didn't work out. But that, I think, is one of the best ways to run a professional meeting, right?
We had cats laying on keyboards and shutting.
That's tricky. Um, Jacob mentioned that there was an uptick in funding available for research. Those of us who do research are happy to hear that. Jacob, you can't give away your company's secrets, but what are some of the interesting research questions, and are they different this year than they have ever been? And um, give us any thoughts about what's cutting edge in research.
Yeah, so I mean, we mainly do management consulting and strategy consulting. So we do a lot of implementation and a lot of, oh, hey, we're launching a new product. Can you help us benchmark that? So a lot of that's been the same, but we have seen some interest in COVID in the food supply, COVID in the supply chain, and how that's going to impact things, or how will we think the markets are going to change in the future? Or do we think there's going to be some sort of trend as it goes forward, or just code and ag in general? Because we have some of our partners do like keynotes and stuff like that at different places. So that's been part of what we've seen, which I think is natural, just given that this is kind of new for all of us basically, and naturally you're going to want to know how is it going to impact our industry and how is it going to impact the sector. But other than that, there really hasn't been a lot of different questions or types of projects we've been on. The big difference I've seen is timelines. We typically do like 3-month engagements, and they've been down to about 6 weeks, so about half that time now. So it's kind of the same amount of work and half the time, just as people, I don't know if it's because we're all home and we are more productive, or we want to see stuff sooner, but that's been the biggest change I've seen, honestly, is just a lot tighter turnarounds.
Robert, any research topics that you would like to be able to farm out or have?
No, I think building what Jacob talked about. So, this past summer, and I don't think it was necessarily an opportunity based on time and kind of that we had people at home, but we went through a fairly significant, we'll call it commercial excellence type of exercise. And so, thinking from a data standpoint, understanding the market potential by different customer bases, by species, working through doing the math on, okay, if we look 5 years forward, basis our strategies, what the growth rates would be, how does that map to coverage models? And so do we want to be a direct B2B client or serve that through maybe an indirect channel? How does that impact our Salesforce coverage and some of those things? And then linking some of that work both to, I would say, I'll call it the back end. So think of supply chain and pricing. And so how do we monetize some of those different segments, some of the capacity constraints that we have from a COVID standpoint? Where do we make some of those choices? And so, we're going through different allocation processes today because we can't service all of the necessarily demand. And so we have to be very deliberate around which customer segments we take on, what complexity we bring, and how does that go through the entire, I would say, commercial and operating system. I think the other thing, Dr. Salin's around labor. And so if you go through the different, producer segments that we talk about, labor is their biggest constraint. And so, being on the call with a bunch of data scientists can be a little bit intimidating, but, thinking about, how, especially customers that we deal with, how they can take their skilled labor. And so think of PhD, C-suite type managers, instead of them going through all of the data that can be produced from an animal from their life stage, how do you actually take that into something that's an insight and something that's actionable? And so really thinking about the time, let's say at the decision level, but also going on farm. And so how do you, solve problems that, labor shortages tied to visas or whatever it could be to solve. And so, it creates a lot of opportunities in the space. And I think from a skill set standpoint for the group that's on the call, very interesting in the future to think about how to make an impact across the industry.
That's a good segue to my next question, mentioning about labor. Here in the university, it's our job to work on professional development of people, and they arrive to us asking us for development and growth. So that's a nice position to be in. Now, when it comes to your career, or maybe you want to talk about your company in general, how did it happen that you built up your expertise? If you ended up, when you started your first position compared to where you are now. So far back, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. How did you develop yourself professionally to advance and maybe to take different roles? And what are the areas of expertise that you would advise our current students to work on?
Sure. Yeah, that's an excellent question. at least luckily, coming from the research program, right, from PhD program, in terms of technical foundation, I realized I was there when I joined. But at the same time, being a research program, I felt like I needed to upskill myself from more like people skills. Although I talk to people, I would say well, but a lot of the things that I had to work on was like more on the communication side. Managing the expectation was a big, important thing. I really had to stick really firm on that, although I violated this time. And also, it depends, I think, on the team as well. One thing I learned was good lessons I learned was in the industry, especially when you're applying for a job, you should really also do research about your future boss. I was lucky in that respect because having a good manager always makes the huge difference. And also, I was lucky enough to be in teams where research is actively encouraged. For example, in American Express, we would read up, papers in computer science, the journals, and then since being a data scientist, we would, discuss and we would organize workshops. It was not easy in the beginning, but I had to put myself there and then organize the workshop. At the same time, in the process, I learned some cutting edge, knowledge. I think in terms of the skill set, the skills I learned was I already had the fundamentals already there, like statistics, economics. And the application was just, learning the industry, and also the soft skill side was also a good development area, especially in the beginning. Yeah, so I think that was most important to me. Yeah.
So it sounds like you worked mostly on developing your skills within the team at American Express. Were there any formal courses you sought out, or new coding language, especially on the people skills? Did you ever take a formal
yes,
speaking class?
actually, yes. On the soft skill side, being a big company, Amex has a lot of resources for development. Actually, you are evaluated like every year. You commit to certain development areas, and you are evaluated based on how much progress you do. In addition to that, we had resources. For example, American Express had a program jointly with Harvard, not business school, Harvard Business Publication. They developed a course, leadership course. That was good. I learned some new things in that course. In terms of the programming language, I would say at least I used to buy courses, for example, in Udemy. Udemy is a great source. You can buy really good courses there, Coursera. I came to conclude best way to learn programming is just doing it. I heard about it. Just do it, apply it to your projects. And then that's how you learn really well. And also the good thing about Coursera was some courses covered the theory part really well, like at master's or PhD level, at least in data science. That was the biggest learning. The programming side is like secondary in my view, at least in our field. Once you get the grasp of the underlying theory, some courses were very useful in Coursera by some Stanford professors who are in the cutting edge of the research side of that data science. So my recommendation in terms of the resources, Udemy is really good. You can find like courses for 10, 15 bucks. Especially, it's mostly, I would say, on the application side, like programming and like, for example, in my case, data science. Udemy was good and Coursera was good. Udacity has some good courses. And also, I find myself, submitting questions in Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow, especially if it's coding related. You get a lot of answers immediately. You don't have to read like half a page of, article. They provide the solutions immediately. Yeah, and also professional. I mean, the conferences, right, in data science also helped me, to learn some good things too.
Mhm. Yasser, you're officially have changed between two company names. I think that may have to do with change at the corporate level rather than you shifting. But if you did change your roles within the company since you've graduated, how was it that you approached those? Did you need to learn new skills, and how did you demonstrate and professionally develop?
Yes. When I first joined the company, I was using pretty much the skills that we learned during the program, and I was working mainly on like demand modeling, demand forecasting, this type of project, which is more on the technical side. And for development there, as Zafar said, you have all those, conferences you can go to, so you can keep up with what the industry has and what's the also in the academic world is going on, right? But from the other side, um, you don't get that people skills that Zafar said until you're on the other side, when actually you're talking to the business, the stakeholders, and that's where the change is. When we to talk to the students we're having here, when, for example, as an example, when you have a project, the way we learn how to present, you start with the introduction. This is a methodology. This is what was done. This is the way how I did it. This is the result. No one has time for that. Like when you lose people after 2 minutes. So, and I learned it the hard way. So in your meetings and your presentations, you have to start with, this is what we found. This is gonna work, so that they have that idea. And then if they ask you, how do you get there or why, then you go into details. So that was like a big shift, and that's something to keep in mind. Um, the other question about the development, I would say you have two parts, right? You have development as like a structured one. So you have classes, you have like conferences, you have courses, you have in your company, you will have some development classes. But I would say that accounts only for 30% of the learning. Once you are in the business environment, you don't have time in most of the cases to go and take 3 weeks to go through a course. So a lot of learning happens actually asking around, see how it was done before, how can we do it better, what worked before, leverage that in the for in solving that challenge. I would say that's very important. So you need both, right? And in my case, that second part is very important, because maybe it would take you, let's say, a week to figure out by yourself, but it's easier to go and ask. It's never bad to ask. Always ask questions, because then at least you will save some time and you can focus only on the way that you think will lead you to the solution. The question about changing jobs, it happened to me. I was in the technical side of the business. I was working for Dow Chemical at the headquarters, which my work was kind of like what Jacob said. It was like a consulting company within the company. So we would work with different businesses, and it would be like a demand forecasting project type of project. But then after that, I wanted to see, well, I want to be on the other side where the decision making is taken, right? And that's why I shifted. And because of my background on ag, when I found an opportunity to actually jump into the ag business, I did that. And I moved from Michigan to Indianapolis. And also my job was totally different, because before it was data analysis. But when I moved to Indianapolis, my job, I was like a market advisor. So that was more, you get all the data, and then you try to synthesize it for the leadership, and you show them what are the trends of the market, what are the market shares. I was part of the market intelligence team. So you had to have a more global understanding of the business. And that's when that experience, getting it from the other team members and other people in the company, is very, very important.
Robert, if you could go on the same point about professional development, and when Zafar mentioned researching to find a good boss, I think you've been in the role of being a great boss for a while. So tell us a bit about that aspect of how to mentor people who maybe are in the early professional development stage.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Salin. So, I think a couple of points that were made before. So I think for students in the program now, if you think about, exiting into industry, think of the development's going to be closer to 70, 20, 10. So 70% would be on the job projects, learning as you go. 20% could be that mentoring or the coaching relationship that you have with a supervisor or a peer. And then the 10% would be back in, let's call it formal education. So it could be classes that you take outside of work, whether it's around supply chain, data, programming, whatever that could be. So I've had the opportunity. I've been, I guess I'm the oldest one on the call now in terms of experience, and so certainly I benefited in my early career by having it wasn't necessarily my first boss, but he was my second boss that spent a lot of time with me. So there were a lot of nights in the office where we would spend 30 minutes and talk about the day, and it wasn't necessarily the teachings that he would give to me. It was more the lessons that we would talk through. And so how the learnings from one project or one activity or one relationship would transfer then to a future problem set. And so it comes back to the 70% that you kind of learn as you go. Certainly, I have a couple of different people. Actually, I just finished a mentoring call before I joined the seminar session. And really for me, it's, monthly calls that I have probably with 10 or 15 people, not only in my broader team, but outside of that. And so even, I have a couple of recent grads that I talked to from our agribusiness program that are just started into our management associate program. And so it's really kind of that monthly session to where, we don't necessarily talk about what they're doing, but it's really open sessions around, hey, how do you influence people? How do you manage stakeholders? Thinking of organizations as a matrix, it's not necessarily always a straight line in terms of who gets to make a decision. There are different influencers and different people that have different areas of responsibility. And so, a lot of discussion goes into how to build those networks, how to influence necessarily when you don't have the decision rights, and who and how to build some of those softer skills.
Jacob, as part of what I know about your career progression, you started working with a corporation. Now you're in consulting, working with all variety of clients. How was it that you decided to move from one to the other, and what skills that you developed in your first stage of your career led to the next? And as you see yourself going forward, what do you think about working for an operations or another firm rather than staying in consulting?
So I did start out trading grain for Consolidated Grain and Barge outside Memphis and in St. Louis. So really what I did then and what I do now is kind of night and day. When I started trading grain, it was honestly something I'd never done before. So I said, let's give it a try. But the skills I learned from that were really to, dealing with people, whether it's, producers and farmers or it's the people you work with, and building some of those skills out, as well as just a workflow and deliver those types of things. I think I always wanted to do consulting. It just took me a while to figure out that is what I wanted to do. And now that's completely different. We're a pretty flexible organization. So like our development stuff it's really self-driven. So my biggest advice on those pieces is leverage your strengths, but improve your weaknesses. So find something you're good at that you can use to kind of get in the door places or something like that. And then also find ways to build those. So whether it is on the job. So for instance, if I wasn't very good at Excel modeling, I have the opportunity where I can ask on a project and say, hey, I'm not very good at this. I'd like to work with it more. And to Zafar's point, doing something is the easiest way to learn something sometimes. So in that case, doing that repetitively and learning different tricks from people that have done it before is what really helped me learn it. And then if we want to take courses, anything that's structured, those types of things, whether it is like a Toastmasters kind of thing to do like public speaking pieces, or we used to have like a contractor that was a professional development or like a personal speaking type person. and she would help with some of those issues if it was like formality or presenting or learning to overcome, issues you may have, whether it's presenting in front of a client or those types of things. So that and then mentorship, I think, are the other big pieces. I've got a mentor that we call once a month, and it's kind of hard to keep things going. So it helps to structure those. And personally, like I have a recurring monthly invite on my calendar, and that's the only way we've been able to keep it going. But for me, that helps because he's a sounding board for professional items as well as personal items, whether it's like, hey, you've got we've got a few kids. I'm expecting my first kid. Like, what can I expect being a dad? Or, what about this client? Or what about this or that? And it's a two-way thing. And I know that I can safely talk to him if he's like, hey, how do you feel about, your role right now? And, where do you want to go from here? And having that kind of resource is extremely valuable because number one, I know he's not just going to go tell somebody, but it's also it makes me feel heard and I guess valued as an employee, which I think is increasingly important these days. That's what gets people to stick around and stay and do those kind of things. So to sum that up, really it's a lot of self-driven stuff. I always seek out feedback and try to identify those weak spots because sometimes people won't tell you like, hey, you need to do better at this or this is an area for development unless you ask about it. And if you ask about it, you can know it, you won't be surprised by it, and you can become a better employee, whether that's for this job or 5 jobs from now.
I have a question in my chat about hiring people. Your career's taken a certain path and what worked for you and getting your jobs and promotions along the way. This year's been quite a change, especially for international students on the job market. We hope it remains so much in flux that it goes back to the way it was a couple of years ago so that it becomes a little more easy. But whether the person's looking for a job in the USA or in international markets, what are some of the competencies that you're looking for and how do you find them, especially as we're no longer having face-to-face interviews? Let me start with Yasser.
I would say when you look at a job description, don't get discouraged because usually what we put in there is like the perfect candidate, right? And to be honest, no one has all those skills that are asked, right? You cannot be very good at like 5 languages, working on like in finance and in supply chain and have 7 years of experience in the business. And then it's not possible. So that's like that's like the dream candidate. But if you feel that yourself that you have maybe like just the 2/3 of that, I would say go ahead and apply because as I said, you will be very surprised. Sometimes the soft skills that we mentioned before, they work too. If you get to the interview, sometimes even if you don't have everything, the fact that they will see that you are a learner, you want to improve, you have that curiosity, that's very, very, very important. So I would say that's something to work on and be positive and push for that, right? From the other side, we're saying like what we're doing, how to help. Like one something that helped me when I was looking for jobs is that start earlier and look what's out there, right? Look at those jobs, description for the jobs you want to, and see what the requirement, and then work to try to get those requirement, right? Let's say, for example, I know that Zafar works with Python, right? So 10 years ago, no one would put in Python in there, right? But you can see the trend in the market. Now people use more and more Python or R. So that's your hint, right? If you're looking for a job in the next 6 months and you go and you look for the jobs you like and you see you have some requirement, work toward those. Even if you don't perfect them, but at least you have more knowledge than the other people. And that would be another tip I would say that it would be helpful. And leverage your network too. If you know anyone that's in a position that you like, reach out to them. And believe me, people are very, very eager to help others. Because when we help people, actually we get some self-satisfaction as well. And I would say being from Texas A&M, we know how our program is strong. And sometimes there's that mismatch. I would say in my case, I knew a lot of things we learned, but the industry calls them different names. And you look at the job description and you're like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what's that. And actually it's the same thing. It just, we call it differently because depend if you have, let's say, economic background or like statistic background, we call the same thing different names. And so that's something else to take into account. That's why I said, look for the job you like, look for something long-term and work toward it. If it doesn't work for that position, it will work for the next one. It's just, and just be positive about it. And I would say even with the COVID, I think there's still jobs out there. I think people are hiring. Maybe they're not hiring right away, but believe me, they're doing all that selection, process so that when it's ready to hire, they will already have their like top of the list. So I would say get to it, start working on it. If you have any question, you can reach out to all of us, and we'll be like glad to help.
Robert, you were just with us with 3 positions open, both in permanent jobs and in internships. So that shows that at least Cargill, your unit at least, has not slowed down hiring. What is it that you're looking for, and how do you find it most effective for an applicant to demonstrate that they have these skills and abilities?
Yeah, certainly, Dr. Salin. So maybe some of the feedback, because we were able to take some of the candidates that I think we selected through the I guess what it is, the Coles career fair into our kind of our final round of centralized interviews. And so part of the feedback that I heard, and I think probably this year was different for most because everything was virtual. And so if we think of career fairs, the interview process, very different than it would have been in the past, is that I think, we have to make sure that from a student standpoint, we enable you with the right skill sets to talk about some of the activities and the skills that you have. And so, as we think about different behavioral style interview questions, how do you use simple, kind of methods, right? So think of STAR: situation, task, activity, result, and make sure to give those examples and be, not only concise, but be able to describe your role, how you work with teams, all of those different things. And so I think as we prepare for, the let's say the next round or those new opportunities coming forward, how do you think about different examples, whether it's solving a problem, working in a team, remote work is going to continue to be a big factor as we move forward. And how do we display that through the communication process in an interview? I think as we think about some of the skill sets that we would want to look to hire. I always think about, okay, from a business perspective, how would I sit through an interview and understand how that we can monetize your skill set? And so if you're having a kind of a data science or an economic modeling type background, how do you link that to a core competency or capability within a business? And so is it strategic pricing? And so how do you tie that and use different models to make more margin from different customer segments? Is it supply chain? And so are we looking at demand or supply, network constraints, all of those things? So how do we make money through that? Market insights. So how do we understand the demand coming for different product lines or categories, and again tie that back into our commercial P&L. So as I think about it, especially with more advanced or graduate degree skill sets, think about different work that you've done within your coursework, but even able to apply that and communicate how the skill set that you have would be able to be monetized by a company.
I wanted to ask this real quickly. I'm in the very end of interviews, the last round of interviews for a position for a mutual fund company. And they had recently told me that if I were to get this position, I would have to start my job working at home for the first 6 months until June. I'm a little bit intimidated by that because I'm not sure how I can adequately learn my job and what I need to do and what my responsibilities are being at home and not being at the office surrounded by my potential peers. Do you all have any advice of learning a career from home, especially just starting out, and how I could actually attain that knowledge and show that I'm a valuable asset for that company?
And maybe I'll try to answer first. So one of the things that I would ask as you move to this kind of final phase is, tell me what the onboarding program looks like. I think Yasser mentioned it before. One of the challenges I think that everyone's facing as new employees joining the organization You're not able to put people side by side and kind of do the show tell do method to learn what that job is. And so, as you seek out to understand those answers, I think understanding the onboarding program, it's probably going to be self-paced. There's going to be different things. It could be, different series 6, 7, 63, whatever that could be coursework that's tied to it, which may not be different than what you would do from an office standpoint. But I think key would be understanding what that first 6 months looks like so that you can feel comfortable about the situation as well.
And let me add that make sure if you are working from home in your first 6 months, you call somebody at the office 2 times a day just to say, hi, I'm taking a coffee break. Do you want one with me? And make it a different person.
Yeah, I mean, some companies are actually encouraging virtual coffee breaks, and now we started having virtual happy hours. Which is weird, but I guess having a FaceTime actually makes a difference. For example, today during our team meeting, we made a decision going forward with some rare exceptions. We're gonna have the cameras on during all team meetings because it was kind of voluntary. So I guess it depends on the company policy as well. A lot of companies, it is new to almost all companies except for a few tech companies who have been, working remotely. So you should not be intimidated. All the companies are also learning as they're doing it. I guess you may need to be a little more proactive. Talk to your boss or talk to some co-workers that you think you're getting along well. Ask them questions and then ask on this one, who's the best person? And then try to, connect with them, try to, have some, good working relationship. And also don't be afraid. One thing I learned in the industry, you should not be afraid of things. Of course, if you cannot do it, you should not take on that, right? It's just you may need to under-promise and over-deliver. But I think it is new to all the company. Even in our company, we're also revising our policies. We had few folks who started virtually, and all the onboarding was done virtually. We had to revise our manuals. So yeah, and if you can postpone your starting date, if you're really concerned, you may ask. It doesn't hurt to ask when I can start the latest. I think being honest and upfront never hurts. You can ask I think having a start in person would be better. And then they may say, well, don't worry. We have new policies. We assign a buddy to you, virtual buddy, so that if you have any questions, you can go to this and that person. That also may work out.
And I would say, Garrett, that's like having a reservation is normal, right? But just ask questions, always ask questions. So if as Robert said, you ask him, where is the plan? And if they show you there's like a clear path for the 6 months, the first 2 months you will do this, then you will meet with this person, then that will make you a little bit feel more confident about the company, that they know what they're doing, right? The other thing is, as Dr. Salin said, it's like networking. And, don't shy from setting up meetings. When I moved to this job, I set up meetings my first 2 months. I had maybe every other day meetings with people I didn't even know, I don't even work with, just to know about the company, right? And you will be surprised how people are willing to share. People love to talk about themselves, right? So once you have those meetings and you ask them, so how does it work? What are you doing? How does that? People will give you a lot of information, will help you, and you can leverage in that onboarding. And again, all companies are out there to make profit, right? If they selected you, it's because this is something in you that maybe you don't see in yourself, right? If they said we can do it online, it's because they know it's possible. So I would say just have self-confidence. Start with ask questions. If something goes wrong, mention it, right? it's better to like if you're gonna something gonna fail, it's better to do it fast and then move to something, in the next step. So communication and ask for a plan, and I would say go for it.
Great. Thank you all so much for the responses. Really helps out.
Jacob, have you ever been in charge of hiring, and what do you look for in terms of documentation of of skills? In particular, I think that is
Yeah,
an interesting idea. Did they tell you at Context Network that they had a plan for working remotely, and since you've done it from the
yeah. I mean,
beginning?
that was up front, was just, hey, we keep our analysts kind of centrally housed in offices, but most of our people work remote, X, Y, Z. So that was always the plan and expectation. So building those virtual competencies was there from the get-go. I think whenever it's looking for either documentation or qualifications, those kind of things, really what matters to us is critical thinking and curiosity. Because the thing is, you can teach somebody to do an Excel model. That's not that big a deal. Now, do you want somebody to have Excel skills or PowerPoint skills, like basic? Yes. But really the willingness to learn those things and the curiosity to learn those things and ask why, or, what's next, is I think what's really important, because that's something that I don't think you can teach, or it's not as easy to teach as Excel or something. So that's really what I think it looks for. Now, there's stuff on LinkedIn. You can take Excel courses and, put that badge on there, those types of things. Mentioning, whatever's, required, or making sure you have buzzwords and those types of things in resumes, especially with algorithms. But I really, like the Aggie Network, for example, is a great tool to utilize because you can get on and you can search by company name, you can search by role or whichever, and pull up people and email addresses that from all over that you can send emails to. Whenever I wanted to get into consulting, that's something I did. I would get off work and I would spend 2 hours sending emails every night. Got a pretty good response rate. And it's even if those people don't give you if you don't get an interview from that, they can help you with your resume. They can help you with, interview questions, preparation, or here's what to expect. So definitely leverage those because they can help you understand, here's what's really needed or here's what we need to work on. They could say, here for this interview, read this book, use this book. Consulting, it's like case in point. It was like a McKinsey book, basically, that everybody uses to ask different questions, and here's what to expect. But I really think it's that willingness to learn and the willingness to be teachable, or, saying, I may not know this, but I'm willing to learn, and I've dabbled in this. And also, like Yasser mentioned, doing things early, maybe building those competencies that, hey, I'm working on this, or I'm looking into this, those types of things. So.
Okay, well, I'll just ask a question of everybody. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm curious, how busy are you this week? And I think I know the answer to that, pretty darn busy. And I appreciate the time that you spent with us. And I hope that this experience helped you to get to know 4 great Aggies who we appreciate their time, and that they shared with us something that we can take forward and feel energized from this hour. So
Dr. Salin, since this is related to job, I want to end at least my part with one note.
Okay.
Sometimes, especially when it comes to hiring, right, a lot of students will be applying. It's not always about you, just that. I've been in interviews, I interviewed candidates, like tens of them by now. Sometimes they already have a person in mind. For example, Yasser. I'll write down all Yasser's skills, for example. I mean, it's not that I have done it, at least I know that happens. It's not about you. Second one is networking. Do not ever underestimate networking. Just like a cold call, just reach out. I get sometimes on LinkedIn requests, hey, I'm applying for a job, or could you introduce me to so-and-so? They're Aggies. I always do yes, and then send it over. At the very least, I send the resume to hiring manager or HR. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to fellow Aggies or any network. It is often underestimated, because what happens is, like, when you send your resume, it may not pass that automatic filter. And if you know someone, at the very least, that person may be able to forward it to hiring manager or HR. you eliminate that robot from the middle. My one advice is always reach out to the hiring manager, even on LinkedIn, just say hi. I think courage is very valued in the industry, at least I think. So yeah, that's my no.
Wise words. Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's time today, and this wraps up our session.